This video begins a series of videos where we will take a closer look at how data in a scenario is organized and the ways that you can manage that data. So it assumes that you've already done the videos that are recommended to precede this video on our website. I'm going to repeat just a little bit of that, though. In the other videos, you already did a few of the steps that I'm going to do here, but I'm going to just repeat that in case it's been a few days since you've done this. We have already installed the Flames launcher. We've already installed the Flames developer. We have installed the tutorial content. We created a Flames project, and we have installed that tutorial content in the Flames project. And it's our project is called Tutorials. And then on the project page in the Flames launcher, we have started Forge. And so we now have the Forge login screen visible. And when I created the project and installed the tutorial content, I created a user for myself that I will own my scenario data. So I'm going to log in as that user. And this pulls up Forge. And just like we did in the other videos, we're going to open. I don't have any scenarios to start out with. I'm going to open. Now, if you've already done this stuff, you'll have a scenario here, so you won't have to repeat these steps. But I'm going to go and open up the Flames examples, and I'm going to open up the single shooter scenario. And as always, I will never log in as the Flames example database user because I don't want to ever, by mistake, modify any of that data. It will mess up all the tutorial scenarios if I do that. So I'm going to say no, which will keep me logged in as my Flames user. So I have my own copy of this particular scenario in memory. So the very first thing I want to do is save it. And since it knows that it's a brand new scenario, it's my own copy of it that's never been saved before, it gives me the opportunity to specify the name. I'm going to leave the name the same as the name that it was and save it. So now I have this tutorial scenario open. And in the videos that preceded this, we took a look at the different kinds of objects that were in a Flame scenario. So I'm going to do that again very quickly. I'm going to go to the Scenario Explorer. And this lists all the objects in the scenario that I can edit, that I have a user interface in Forge to be able to edit. Of course, there are way more objects in Forge. But these are all the ones that are part of the scenario, this specific scenario that I have the ability to edit. So, of course, I have my units, and we've looked at all this before, and I've got all different kinds of parameters. Most of these parameters are things that will hang off of a unit or be used to compose a unit, with the exception of the environment. And the environment is the place in the world and the objects in the world that in which this scenario is executing. Then we have cognition models that get attached to unit, and then we have all the different types of equipment models that get attached to units, and then things that augment the equipment models, different attribute models, and then we'll talk about dictionary entries and patterns in other videos. So you've seen this before, and we've been working with this a little bit before already. Something that was also introduced to you is the concept of meta objects, which is the primary purpose of this video, is to talk about meta objects. So we're going to go down here and look at a particular type of meta object. I'm going to go to platforms. When I click on an entry right here, I get the platforms window, and it shows me the platform objects that I have created. These objects are what we refer to in Flames as meta object. In fact, all of the objects that are listed underneath here, these are all meta objects. A meta object is an object that has been created that allows us to be able to specify input values and save them under a given name. So I've got all different types. I can have different classes of objects here, and I can specify the inputs and create objects here. We're going to talk about how we do that in another video. But the point here that I want to make is that these objects that are listed right here that are available in all these different windows, and there's one window for every type of meta object, and you've already been introduced to that in another video. These meta objects don't ever actually execute in a scenario. They allow me to specify input parameters, as I've mentioned, but they cannot be used in a scenario until they are cloned and attached to a particular unit. And that happens as a part of the composition for a unit. So if I right-click on one of these units and I say Edit, it opens up the Units window. And as you've seen in other videos, we have here a list of the models that are attached to this unit on the Composition tab. So this red truck, even though the name is the same, and I can double-click on this, and it'll take me right back to the Platforms window and show me this. This red truck is not the same. This one right here is not the same as this one right here. The objects that are listed underneath the composition for a given unit are copies of the meta objects of the same name. So here's a platform, and again, if I double click on this, what I have attached to the unit is a copy of that meta object. The reason we do it this way is because it's possible to create a bunch of units that all have the same platform. I could have 1,000 trucks in my scenario. And if I had an individual user interface for editing each of the objects that were attached to each unit, and again, most units have more objects than this. These tutorial models is simple. It's not uncommon to have 10 or 15 different types of objects attached to a unit. If I had to individually edit the input parameters for each of these objects, it would just be prohibitively labor intensive. So what we do is we cannot edit these values directly. We instead edit the meta object associated with it. So here's, I'm using a blue truck right here. So I go over to the meta object, I enter all these values, and then when the scenario is configured, which we'll talk about in a future video, all of the objects that make up the composition of the unit are recreated. We reclone all the meta objects, and they get attached to this unit. So again, we don't edit the values of these unique objects that are associated with every unit. We don't edit those directly. We go back and we edit the parameters associated with the meta object. And then during scenario configuration, the meta objects get cloned and attached, and unique copies get attached to the unit. So that applies to all types of equipment models, to jammers, data processors, comm devices, all of these. And this is a very, very simple scenario. So I have a very small number of meta objects. I pretty much have just one in most cases of each type of equipment model that we can have, so that we can talk about these different types without having to look at a really complicated scenario. So this is extremely simple. And cognition models, the same thing. These are also meta objects. So the cognition models and equipment models and attribute models, these are also meta objects. These objects are all meta objects, and they all get cloned and attached to units. So the attributes, the equipment, and cognition models are the types of models that get attached to units, and they're all meta objects. Environment models, which we'll talk about in another video, these models are not meta objects because they are part of the environment. They exist in the scenario. And so there's only one copy of those, and these are the real object. That's the real terrain. We don't clone that and attach it to a unit. This is the real Earth model. We don't clone that and attach it to a unit. Effects are kind of like meta objects. They don't get attached to a unit, but they get cloned and created when the effect gets generated. Effects usually get generated when a munition is detonated. Atmospheric conditions, we don't have any of those loaded in this scenario. So the environment models are not meta objects because these don't get attached directly to units. But cognition models, equipment models, and attribute models, these are all meta objects. So with that background, we're ready to talk about how these meta objects get attached to units, and that takes place in the configure step of the life of a scenario, and that's what we'll talk about in a future video. Thank you for watching, and thank you for using Flames.